Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the lab. I'm excited for today's episode as we are going to continue diving into the wonderful world of sports science and physical therapy. And luckily, we have a fantastic guest with us today. His name is Tommy Otley from the University of Miami down in Florida, who primarily works with men and women's basketball. So, Tommy, thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. This is a pleasure to get to talk with you. We found each other recently, and so love what you've been putting out. I'm really excited to join the conversation here.
I know. I feel like it was like that simultaneous, I followed you, you followed me, and I started going through all your content. And I was like, oh, he gets it. This guy gets it. It's going to be a great talk today. Hope you guys are all excited. And I got a whole lot of questions for Tommy. So we're going to kind of dive into the weeds with this, especially with the last episode that came out the previous week about how, we have all this testing that we do in a return to sport battery, but we still miss. And a lot of the research isn't all that great. We're still working on creating better. So, Tommy, let's get started.
All right, let's go.
So number one, so you wear many hats. So you sit in a role that's kind of split between clinician and then also part sports scientist. So what does having both seats kind of allow you that maybe a typical staff where, you have the silos of strength coach, PT, AT, like how do you feel that is going to allow you to have better insights that most maybe miss?
I think first off, it starts with the team of people you have around you. And I think that works what I do only works with the fantastic staff that we have at Miami. And so being able to blend between some of those roles, I think helps in certain ways, especially with transitioning players from one to another. Weight room to training room back and forth. And so I think it's unique because I get to see things from a little bit different perspective. Second thing is my job, oftentimes I just get to be the problem solver. So if this isn't working, that's not working, I get to pop in and try to figure out and play with the things that maybe tweak this, maybe tweak that in terms of what a player needs or what our staff's kind of process is going to be. Other pieces, I get to be the man behind the curtain with all the data sometimes, and whether I like that or not, sometimes changes, but I get to help inform some of the stuff that we do that way too. By no means do we safeguard or keep the technology away from different parts of our staff, but it helps when somebody's helping to streamline that process a little bit. And so that's kind of what my hat is in that role too. But it's fun. I get to blend between early rehab with our AT, and then might go work with me a little bit during the middle phases, transitioning to strength. And then our athletic training staff is fantastic with a lot of on-court rehab too. So we all, I would say that I've said this before, but I think our staff, like you, and I got this from our football staff, you got to have a SEAL team where everybody can do everybody's job a little bit, but then you have your specialty. And so I think that's something that our staff does really, really well. And it's a joy to be a part of.
That's awesome. That's beautiful, man. It's actually wonderful to hear, especially in the fact that I feel like sometimes in particular settings, people become almost territorial of this is mine, that's yours. You worry about rehab and I'll worry about performance. So the fact that you guys have almost established like platooning of work throughout the continuum of care is fantastic. So what do you think would be some like characteristics that I guess would optimize that working between the different systems?
Yeah, I think, well, one, there's a great resource that just came out. I think it's talking about something about handoffs. I'm completely blanking on the page, but I believe it's by Martin Buckheit. It's a new paper, but I think it really puts what a lot of teams have already been doing well into writing. And so that's a really good paper resource for it. But I think for us, things that work well is just one, starting off with the understanding that nobody owns performance, nobody owns rehab. I think we all have special roles in licensure and all this stuff about what you can do, what you can't do. There's guardrails on things, but I think it helps when like what other people add to the process early on is just as important as what I'm doing. And I think that we're all pulled in different strengths and in different tensions and different time points throughout the process for an athlete bringing it back. But we all have value throughout those phases. I think what makes that unique in terms of how we do it in our process is just a lot of open communication about what people need during that time point. I think a lot of times we even get stuck between the two rooms of the training room and the weight room and the staff from rehab and staff performance. And you got to bring coaching staff into that too. And so I think figuring out where all those three kind of pieces align has worked well for us in terms of how we're collaborating, how we're making sure people are getting all the pieces that they need throughout the process.
I like it, man. Have you guys gone about like reducing the amount of conflict when you guys have, I guess, maybe a situation that maybe doesn't flow as well as you would like? Like, what are some of the communication barriers or resolutions that you kind of come to find being between
Yeah.
two?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it really depends on your model. And we kind of talked about this real briefly right beforehand, but like you have different approaches, right? You've got models like a more high performance director model where you've got somebody at the top that makes the final say. College is not like that a lot of times, right? And so it's a very flat model where nobody's necessarily nobody's boss within the team unit. You know, strength coach is not the rehab's boss, rehab is not strength. And so I think the biggest thing is understanding, and we have one, I work with fantastic people, and it's not like they're coming from a place where that happens a whole lot. But I think the biggest thing is tying it back down to that we all are really valuing what each other's skill sets. We just need each other at different time points. And then the other piece is that at the end of the day, it's what does the athlete need the most, and how, you know, what is this shift towards and shift the focus towards at that time point? What matters most? Um, and what is the one thing that we have to do right now that's important? And the rest of the stuff is a lot of times filler that works and doesn't work and is very contextual. But usually, I think we've been able to boil it down without getting too into it ever before. So hopefully, we keep it that way.
That's good. Oh, I love it. I love it. Oh, so kind of moving into the meat of our conversation here today. So I want to kind of go into the next set of questions. So we're going to talk a little bit more about return to play testing and just getting a little bit more background. So you've argued publicly that passing return to play testing isn't the finish line. And we talked about this in the last episode as well. So what were you actually seeing in athletes that basically standard clearance criteria wasn't picking up?
Yeah, I think we see two things. I think you've got my own anecdotal perspective, and then you have what the research says. And thankfully, they're kind of the same, which is good. It's always good when those two things go together. Anecdotally, I think you see it all the time. You know, you return somebody, they
Mm-hmm.
pass all the tests, and then there's a difference between functional testing and testing of capacity, and then how it plays out in the actual demands of chaotic sport. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think you can have all the right pieces, all the right things, and then it all has to come together. And then if you're returning and you're lacking in certain areas, certain capacities, it just further magnifies that a lot of times too. In some cases, then in some cases you got guys that have terrible deficits, they go back and they can still hoop, right? So take that with what it's worth. But I think what we see in research, and this is kind of my PhD area of interest, is when people get back in team sport, what are they facing? What are the barriers they're facing between being a productive member of the team again? And it's not something that, and others are very interested in this right now. There's some great research by Zach McLean and Matt Jordan on this. They just put out a recent paper on it too. But I think there's a gap between what we see when someone goes back to play and what they can do in terms of a production standpoint. I think there's a ton of barriers that and constraints and contextual factors that lead to that. One of them being not being physically ready, right? And so even if you pass testing, testing is a snapshot. It's in a lot of places, especially in a clinical environment, testing's done on one day. It's your graduation. It's crossing the finish line, and you get to ring the bell. We get your picture taken with the return to play sign, and we're good. But we know like that doesn't happen in an instance. It's a return process, right? It's this sliding graded scale of when you're getting back, when you're performing again. And there's not always that's a significant milestone, and I'm not meaning to take away from it, but it's just another step, right, in the right process. And so I think physical capacity and return to sport testing is one piece of that, but there's so many other pieces and factors that go into it that are really critical as well.
Okay. So then let's go a little bit more in depth on that last part. So like you said, like graduation, ring the bell, and they continue. So then what would be like the process? So like if someone is cleared to play, you would call them quote unquote back to play. What are you doing to monitor them as they're starting to get reintegrated back into that? Like, are there
Yeah.
specific or special things that they have to go through while they're integrating back in?
I'd say one. I think most people just were done, right? We never see them again. We hope the best. They cleared the clinic, they're gone, and we go, all right,
Let's see.
well, I'll see you later, right? Wash my hands, I'll check out the dust. You see you later. So I think the big thing with that is most people aren't even following it, and not necessarily do you have the capacity to do that in an outpatient type environment. What makes it unique in our setting is, and this is something that was taught to me my first year in residency. I think we had a lecture from Sierra Berge. She's with the Aces now as their like performance director. It was like her experience changing from a resident and being able to like first time where you're like, oh shoot, like I returned this person, now I gotta go watch them play their sport, and then you used to go like, all right, have fun, I'm so proud of you. Now you're just sitting on the end of the bench like, I really hoped everything we did worked, biting your nails, right? So I think that's something that shifts into a team environment where you're like, I'm with this person, like we have to deal with the outcomes now, and so the outcomes stare you in the face a little bit more than they did before. With that, I think you start monitoring several things. I think the most important thing is sport itself, right? How are they playing, right? And that's sometimes that's something you can objectify very well. Sometimes it's not. And I think some of the stuff that really goes into that is, coaches oftentimes will tell you if they look good or not, right? So that's one piece. Coach's eye is really important in our setting, and we try to involve it not at the end, but throughout the process. And then the second thing is production. And when you find in research is production is diminished for several seasons, sometimes depending on the injury, or even right, like ACL, very notably diminished depending on what sample and study you look at, but basketball pretty consistently from 1 to 2 years after, at the high level. College, there's not really any data on that, so that's some stuff that we're working on. Maybe soon we'll have out there. And then I think the other piece of that is that just because they're not producing doesn't mean that it's their fault, right? Roles change, minutes played change, and utilization is something that is not up to the player, right? So if we're just going to look at studies that just look at points or player efficiency rating, all this stuff, there's so much that changes behind the scenes that you can't necessarily say they're just less effective player. They're just getting less opportunity. And one more thing, sorry, I'm rambling, but one more thing that goes from that, I think, is we have all these models about reintegration into live play. That's hard. And it's really hard to do that. Even in a team, it's really hard. In a clinic setting, it's nearly impossible. In a team setting, it's really hard still, and it's not as easy as saying, oh, we built this live play exposure for them graded with 2 players to 3 play, like those other players are playing in high minute demand roles, and to be able to switch back in and pull them into a rehab case is hard. And so I think we like to create this idealistic option of how we do it, but it's a little bit messier, and I think that also has why you might see that adjustment period when an athlete returns as well.
Okay. I like it. In terms of like when you start getting into the return to play, like you're just discussing, have you ever had someone who has quote unquote met the metrics, but you yourself don't personally find that they're ready? And like, how do you go about communicating that? Because the coaching staff or the team will see that, hey, like they've met the standard, they're quote unquote cleared. Why aren't you letting them come back?
Yeah, I think the first question I have back on that is like, what is the metric? Like, what are we calling the metric, right? Is the return to criteria hop testing alone? Are we calling it strength and that? Are we calling it that you hit a certain exposures of practice and training volume from like wearables? Like, there's so many different metrics you can nail down to that. And so I think depending on and it's not all about the metrics to me, but I think depending on how broad that metric list is and what constructs they represent for the player in question, I think that changes my perspective on it, right? So like if you're just getting a functional type assessment, I don't necessarily rest all my confidence on it, right? Hop testing has some good pieces to it, but a little bit limited utility in terms of actually assessing the constructs you think it is. If you're thinking it can assess their strength, it's not, right? And so we have to know what are we actually looking for and what constructs are relevant to the injury in question. And then
Hmm.
in terms of the graded exposure process, how has that been and gone, and what does it look like as well? You can have somebody coming back from a soft tissue injury and strength looks great from an isometric standpoint, but now they have to apply that strength at a high speed, whether they're running, they're sprinting. So that's why you don't just clear a hamstring because they're tested great on like, all right, go sprint again. You've got to build the ramp back to that, right? And so I think that process of the ramp of where they are to where they need to get to, or the ceiling to floor is process, or floor to ceiling. Hopefully not going that way. Floor to ceiling. That's gone well too, right? And you're meeting those demands of what they need to be capable of.
Good. Have you ever had instances where an organization or wherever you've been uses like a general battery of tests and like that's just the standard that they follow? Or do you prefer more of an individualized based battery based on the sport and the individual or
I
position?
think that's a great question. I think I have a high level of respect for both. I think there's value in having a set battery, especially for certain injuries. I think
Mm-hmm.
getting a whole organization to do that across the board is challenging. I think there's places that have done it really, really well, and I think
Mm-hmm.
part of that is there is twofold need for it. It's valued across sports, it's valued across the department, but then there's also value in doing it from a research standpoint. And so certain colleges, programs, they're ingesting that data and then using it to further improve the athlete experience. And I think that's really, really fantastic. I hope that one day we're building that type of thing here too.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge with that is what if you need to test it 8 months versus 9, and your protocol is like, well, we only test it 9, 6, and 9 months, and then you're like, well, this guy's going to return right this month, and he looks capable and he looks functional and he's done everything he needs to do. And so I would say we have set testing that we like to perform for different things.
Mm-hmm.
But it's when they're ready to do so, and such is a sliding scale. And on the flip side of that, I've seen people who come in for 6 month testing in a place where we have set batteries, and they're not ready to test yet. They shouldn't be hop testing because they've had such a bad exposure, or they're not ready. Hopefully they were my people, but they've come in for testing, right? And so,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not functionally capable of doing it yet. And so I think there's a flip side to both of it. One, very valuable because I think you have a standard approach to it, but then what works for one team might not work for others, and then what works at different time points for different populations may or may not too.
So take me through a day in Tommy Otley's shoes of doing return to sport testing. So what are you necessarily collecting day to day, and what would you say you from when you first started to now? What have you changed or added, like as you've gained experience?
Yeah, I have shaved off a ton of stuff. I think when I first started in this role, I was very eager. I was ready to go, and I was like, and I'd seen a lot of things tested in a lot of different environments. And I think the thing you tend to do when you try to be a sponge of a person is you just pull everybody's ideas in, and then as you improve and you learn and you grow, you go, well, I can start letting some of it go too, right? And so you go through the process of like, this is all great, but this doesn't fit my environment, or this doesn't fit this team or this culture or whatever, right? And so I think um, testing for me starts like when an athlete arrives, and the biggest part of our testing is their
Mm-hmm.
history. It's not a test, it's what are they coming in with, what has their experience been before, what have they struggled with. All of that is something we look into in depth in their process, and we're seeing it a lot more frequently because we have transfer portal stuff going on. So in our sport in basketball, it's much more frequent that this is happening, and it makes it even more important why history is so important, and being able to figure out what's going on with them beforehand. Next, I think we have stuff that everybody does, and that's baselining stuff. I wouldn't say it's risk mitigation always, but it's just if you get hurt, we will have having some numbers on you, so we just have somewhat of a target to get back to. By no means does it mean that that's the most validated way to do it, or I think getting more than one testing point is important. So we try to do that too. But we like getting common soft tissue injury types kind of covered with that. So
Mm-hmm.
quad strength, hamstring strength, adductor strength, um, calf strength, and all of that kind of just in a bucket by itself. So we just know what our typical athlete looks like and what our team looks like, and we get some good information from that. Beyond that, we are more of a very individualized approach where, depending on what your injury history is, we're not looking to test you just to test you. We're looking for what constructs are important for that injury profile. So if you have a history from a knee, we're probably not just going to do isometric testing. We're probably going to isokinetic test you. We'll probably get a couple of different series of force play jumps, not just counter movement jumps, general screening. We'll probably go into a little bit more depth and see, have you reached the capacities that you need to reach when you return? If it's a hamstring injury, we're doing something slightly similar, but a little bit different. And so I think that's the kind of stuff that how we navigate that. But I think most of the time it's just about the history. What do we need to pull and what do we need to dive into? And is there anything that's currently bothering them too?
Okay.
And that helps us navigate where they're at in the process with that. Is this something that is just kind of ongoing? And where do we need to plug them into really who needs to work with them, right? So like,
Yeah.
and I think that's a big part of like how we navigate all three members, strength, PT, and AT working together. Is like, all right, well, who's best suited to manage this? If it's something that's going to need a lot of individual time, it might sit more with me, because our AT's job is to make sure our team doesn't fall apart and everybody keeps running and everybody keeps working, right? They're the main part of the show. But I can step back and say, all right, let's take 2 hours and work on this, or here and there throughout the week. And then in the weight room, are there different capacities that this person needs that are unique from what the rest of the training program is for all the other people too. So, yeah.
Okay. So what's the means of establishing, I guess, going more into detail about like who works with who? Is there a particular like, I guess, criteria or something that you would flag on someone's measurements that you would be like, hey, no, this person's definitely going to be working with Tommy? Or is it just based off like the doctors that you're working with or the coaches?
It's a little bit of both. I don't think we have like a clear structure. I think it's very often like, is this going to take a lot of unique time to do, and is there going to be a notable amount of time loss? That's when it like definitely gets kicked to me. If it's like, this person ain't playing for a while, all right, have fun, Tommy. You get to help with that. But I think the other piece is uh, we we work together on terms of planning for all of our athletes. So we sit down in a room weekly and program together a lot of times too. And so it's not like I'm making decisions on a rehab program that someone's carrying out or vice versa. It's just team like, hey, what else do you think would be really important? Am I missing anything on this case? All that type of stuff is stuff we have every day. And I think that's like, if I have a post-op, I'm not just working on that by myself. We work in the same room, so why not pull on everybody's strengths in terms of what their thoughts are. They see, you get dialed in when you're working with somebody and you have like these checkbox of this needs to get done, this, early ACL, I need the extension range of motion. We got to work on getting their quad firing, blah, blah, blah. And then you forget like, hey, like this person needs to remember how to get in and out of bed. Like you get dialed in. And so like having other people's thoughts, and like, it's just good to you have more people. Why not bring them into to how you're managing stuff? Exactly. And so I think at the same time, you got to have structure without it just being this, like, nobody gets anything done because nobody knows what their job is. So you have to have both of that. And I think the balance is something that is never the same for any team. It's really about like managing how do people work together, what are the dynamics, all that kind of stuff too.
It's like a flowing teamwork.
Flowing teamwork. Yeah, it's like flow. In basketball, you break out of the play, you go into flow, then you go back in. Somebody calls a play, you go back into it. It's the same thing.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. So you made a few comments about like being out in the outpatient setting. So most of our audience might not have some of the technology that you might have in the college setting. So what would be like the stripped down version of a framework if someone is out in an outpatient PT or out in a rural area that might not be able to go in and do the heaven help me, the Biodex testing?
Yeah, I think research has shown that you're probably going to underestimate some things. So just be more confident that you need to have it closer to more strength to body weight, whatever it is. You got to anchor it to things. And I think there's challenges when you don't have heavy normative data sets like isokinetic has for strength to body weight, things like that. But there's some really good affordable options for strength testing, and I don't think you have to get too tied into a certain device or a certain tool. I
Mhm.
certainly am not. I think that's what your goal is, to assess certain constructs, right? Your goal is to
Mhm.
assess strength or force production. Maybe strength is probably a bad way to say that, because you're really assessing force production, right? Um,
Mhm.
or torque if you're going to use a moment arm, which is probably important. So, but
Mhm.
they have. I'm not going to just name devices, but like there's affordable dynamometers out there. There's affordable solutions for strength. Hop testing has its utilization. You just have to understand what you're trying to do. It's not about the distance that somebody can jump and if it's symmetrical. It's about looking at the
Mhm.
movement patterning that they're doing, because it's going to tell you a lot more about how they achieve the outcome, right? And you don't have to necessarily break out and start drawing angles and what their knee flexion was. I don't think that's the most important thing, but I think
Mhm.
popping a phone on it and recording it and looking at what's different about both sides. Um, and then a big piece for me is what if they haven't met the I'm big on like isolating to integrate. If you don't have the isolated components you need, you can't perform the task that same way. Your body will figure it out, but
Mhm.
it's not going to be probably the same way that you would have done it if you had the functional components underneath set. So like if you don't have strength, your body's going to figure out how to jump. It's just going to jump differently. And if you don't have range of motion, it's going to figure out how to do a task. It's just not going to do it the same way. And so just kind of backwards tracing where are those problems along the bottom and when have I checked them off. And I don't think you have to get tied into a certain test or a certain way to do it. Is there's probably better ways than others, but you're just making sure, have I checked off the box? If you don't have that, it's a different construct, but like put them on the knee extension machine and see how much they can lift. And if they can lift it, and if your machine maxes out, how many reps can they do at the maxed out weight, right? there's like,
Exactly.
there's ways to tailor it. It doesn't test the same thing, but it is still a valuable piece that is giving you information of like, that's maybe parity or kind of around that construct.
Mhm.
That's my best advice.
I like it. I know I heard a quote recently that I can't remember what group it was from, but they were stating that you can't use exercise as an assessment. I kind of heard that. I was like,
That's the best assessment, right?
exactly. That's where I thought. I was like, how on earth? What world are we living in? Oh man. But no, I like your background, man. This is fantastic. I think for the people who are more in the outpatient setting, there's a wealth of information. Do you have any in particular that you would maybe see as being like some of the best to look into for maybe if they're out in that type of setting?
Yeah, for testing, in terms of resources
Yeah, resources are
or
just like a general like
tools.
tools.
Yeah, tools. I
Not that
think
big.
from like a very cheap, affordable like dynamometer, Tindeck has a great option.
Yep.
There's other big brands out there, but Tindeck is super cheap, and I love
Yep.
cheap. I think it's super. Even in our setting, I think you think that high performance teams have got like endless budgets, and sometimes we do, but I think simple is sometimes even better a lot of times too. And so I would say that's a great one. Whenever you're looking into one, attention based stuff is always usually to me superior, just because you can anchor it to something if you have that. And so I would look into that. Resources for like learning about them. I love the stuff that uh, Joe Club puts out a lot of really good stuff in Global Performance Insights and just free resources on testing techniques and setups on YouTube. I think that's really good if you want more of a paid course. I don't get endorsed by them by any means, but I like what Dungeons and Dynamometers puts out. I think they do a really good job
Yes.
with their testing, and it's so practical, and so like really makes you question why you need some of the data sometimes, and why it might be helpful, and what it does do and what it doesn't do. So those guys do a really good job too.
That is wicked. I have a buddy named Alex Gale he loves their stuff. Absolutely
Yeah,
loves it. So I would second that. I think it's fantastic.
yeah, no,
It's
they've
good to
got good
have.
stuff. So good dudes too.
Great recommendations, man. So we're going to take a little bit of a pivot and we're going to go into your PhD. So you're currently working on one at the University of Miami. So my first question is, where do you think the line is right now between what's published and peer reviewed versus like what's actually being used or in progress?
I think for me, or like just in general,
Both. We'll go both.
I
Let's start
think,
with you first.
well, for me, I think our process, we've got a couple things on the way, so I don't want to spoil everything, but there's some stuff coming in on differences between return to performance, what constructs people are looking at when they're assessing different things, and how we might look at it. I think we've got some other hopefully good perspectives coming out, and then yeah, it's going to be hopefully good stuff. It's not easy working full time and doing your PhD. I've learned, but it's worth it, and uh, it's been a very rewarding process for me, and I've learned a ton about what literature can do and what it can't do. And I think I've through that, I think you would think, oh, you're going to lean on that circle of evidence-based practice a little bit more, right? You've got the Venn diagram of the evidence from a research literature component, the clinician experience, and the patient perspectives, beliefs, and their experience, right? And you think, okay, I'm going to expand that one piece of the pie and it's going to get better. And then you realize there's just so much to why challenges to like, nobody can ever run a really good study. You know, your first year in your PhD, you learn, you're like, man, like, how am I going to actually like, we just went over like all the problems with research. I don't know how I can ever create anything good. Right.
Yeah.
So, and then I think you dial it back in and see like there's a lot of ways to do things and piece it together and still provide value. So that's where I'm at right now. Just figuring out how does the stuff that we're putting together best inform everyone and it not just be papers because of papers' sake. But I think from the broader, I would say, body of literature, there's just so much so much research, right? And I think that's one of the challenging things when you're a clinician is that you may not have a certain area that you're like, this is the one area I'm really interested in, right? Like for me, like now I'm like every time a paper comes out on return to performance, stuff like that, I'm like I find it, I read it, I'm like ingesting it as quick as possible. But when you're in a clinic and you see rotator cuffs one day, hips, then post-operative hip, you see an ACL, you see there's so much research on all those different topics to try to skim and stuff. It's challenging to navigate, and so um, I think one of the things that I learned in residency is like you have to create for yourself some type of educational plan, and it's
Yes.
hard because you don't know what you don't know until you know it, but you still need some structure in terms of how you're guiding your learning. Because if you're just in the clinic and you're like trying to read every paper that pops up, it's just too much, and you just sometimes it just makes it harder and
Overwhelmed.
worse.
Yep.
But if you're like, I want to learn about this right now, I'm going to spend a lot of time on this topic or this piece, and I'm going to read papers from different viewpoints, different perspectives, that kind of stuff, I think helps a ton because then you see like, wow, this paper may bring in some value in this area. This is why it wouldn't work in my context or why it doesn't work in this setting and or how I need to adapt it. And as opposed to just taking um, a certain framework as is and as law, and I'm trying to apply it in an environment where it just doesn't work.
I like it. So going back to when you were in like your first year of practice, knowing what you know now, what would you tell yourself about maybe designating 1 to 2 hours a week of just going through research?
Ooh, the lights turning off. Give me a second.
You're good.
Um, about going 1 to 2 weeks for research. I would say uh, I was blessed to have gone into a residency environment with some really fantastic mentors that helped navigate that process. And it doesn't mean that I still tried to eat the elephant in one bite all the time. But I think that's the big thing I would tell myself is like you can rush information
Mhm.
ingestion. You can't rush like I want to come up with a cool quote here. You can't rush it. You can't rush like your learning and your actual process of applying it, right? You can rush
Yeah.
like you can it's the same thing like why new grads,
Yeah.
you could read as many papers as you want to, but you haven't treated any patients yet, really. And so, like, as a PT, so you're walking into something and you've been equipped in terms of the knowledge base, but you don't necessarily have the exposure from how this works and how it doesn't work and all the that applied side of practice. And so I think as you go on, you start to learn like this works, this doesn't work, and you're building your clinical skill set. And then the same thing with research. You're like, I learned this about this. How do I actually integrate it into what I do? Um, there's you'll get better at it in time. And so I think patience is maybe something I would have told myself. I early on, maybe more than anything else, like just young Padawan, you're still learning, and I'm still by no means a Jedi master. I just feel like I'm making steps in that direction, right? And I think there's a really good book. I always reference this book because it's been such foundational for me. But Mastery by Robert Greene, and it's
Yeah.
it's a really good book on, and it's long, so there's an abridged version if you want the cliff notes. I do recommend it, unless you have an audiobook and you like those, do the full book audiobook and then buy the little one. But it really like goes in and dives into what it means to in his approach is really like you're harnessing the master's like skills and abilities. You're trying to sponge and soak up and steal, for lack of a better word, those ideas for yourself in terms of how you integrate them into your process. And um, for me, I think the best thing I've gotten is just you see how the people who have integrated research in their practice do it well, and then try to rub shoulders with them, learn about how they do it, and what their process is. And once you have a process to do so, I think it really makes your learning process more refined, and um, you have more structure to how you do things, as opposed to just trying to shotgun approach with as many different things as possible.
I like it. It's like where comprehension meets application. Being
Absolutely.
able
There
to
you go. You
like
got the cool quote. I got to say, just ramble for 10 minutes. Yeah. Love it.
yours is way more in depth. Mine is just short and sweet.
No, it's better though. That's good.
So where do you think the published literature is the strongest right now with return to sport? And where do you think most of it's still like just theory?
Yeah, great question. It depends, I think, on the injury too, right? But if we're just gonna say, if you're gonna use ACL, which is everybody does, I think uh, that's a great question. I think return to sport. We haven't exhausted it, but sometimes I feel like we've exhausted. Like there's so many papers, right, on ACL return to sport, right, and we still don't know anything. But I think there we know that the I would say we know that the capacity assessing capacity is extremely important, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it may predict re-injury. It may have something to do with that. I would say that it probably has a piece of the puzzle, not everything, right? You have graft placement, you have all these different things that just are like go into it, right? But I think we have a good idea, like the purpose of functional testing, strength testing, all that is I think well established. I think then at that point we have cut the reins off and said, all right, they're back, let's go. And that's why my interest has gone where it's gone. And like in the situations where we can follow these people longer, what can we learn about it? And is there more to be done on that end? By no means have we, I think, finished return to sport. Um, and do we have a good understanding of that either, necessarily? But I think we have some solid stuff on there.
Always wading through the means of information, never knowing a lot, but we know some
thing will
stuff.
tell you one thing will tell you another, right? So
one says we don't know.
exactly, I like those the best. Usually, those are usually good ones.
Nothing's a dogma, nothing's set in stone. Which is good.
Definitely. Yep.
So, what do you think would be a metric or a test currently used in the field that isn't going to be or won't hold up in the next 5 years?
This is going to be like one of those like I think to Bill Simmons, they have like those little hot take prediction things they do, and then they show the clip in like five months, and it's totally wrong.
Yeah.
So that's going to be me right now. I think the I think we have a very high obsession with uh, assessing biomechanical information, and
Mhm.
I think it has a place. I think without more advanced, which I think is coming with more advanced uh, modeling, I think
Mhm.
its utility is challenging to me. And I think uh, when you are assessing movement in vivo, like movement in sport, to me, I think there's a lot of opportunity for that. But there's so much task variability. There's a I think the utility of using biomechanical data in small uh, hop testing, those type of tasks,
Mhm.
I think we have traditionally been like, well, that's somewhat how they're representative of how they're going to move in sport. And I just think that disconnect, I think it will eventually happen, that those are two different things, and that
Mhm.
I'm hoping it happens, right? Like you don't move like that when you add in a task that is different. You don't move like that when you add in um, reaction to or response to an external stimulus. You don't react to that the same way, and movement looks different, and that's okay. And I think um, hopefully I'm right in this, that I think we will become more accepting and not swing the pendulum so far that
Mhm.
it's not healthy, but that we're more accepting of movement variability um, within tasks that require that.
I would agree with you on that. I think we are, I mean, I'm not going to name a specific organization, but I think when we create almost a rigid structure of battery and we don't deviate from it, I think we almost create more room for error because we're applying one battery to all athletes.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're all using hop tests for all or each lower extremity injury, I'm not a fan of that. I don't think that
No,
should be
for sure.
applicable. I think
Yeah,
it
yeah,
it
that's
needs to
another
be
good one too.
imitating the needs of the sport. And I agree with you. I'm actually hoping that you are very right on that.
I hope so. We'll see. We can
Time
play
will
back
tell.
and see.
Time will tell. So we'll move on to the next section of questions here. So kind of bringing it down before we close out here. So for a PT or a coach without any elite level resources, they're in the middle of nowhere. You know, what's one thing they could start tracking on Monday to maybe move toward return to performance instead of thinking it as a pass and fail? Like, how can we do better at the outpatient level? Because one of the things that I like to do is I like to find my, like, you have your team and you have your people that are in the college setting. What I'd like to do is to find my group of companies in the area that I live to work with different strength coaches and get to know a lot of the different athletic trainers at the different high schools. How can we do that? Or what would be like the first thing on Monday that people should start doing?
Yeah, no, I think you're stealing what I was going to say already. Like, I think for me, the most important piece is not necessarily maybe tracking a metric, but
Mm-hmm.
in building those connections. Because I think when we're talking about performance, if you're trying to do all that within a 30-minute session in your clinic, it's not going to happen, right? And so to me, that's where it becomes very critical that we look outside. What other resources does that person have access to? Just like you said, within your environment, that's important for you to know what's available in my city or within my town or within this group of different practitioners in the area. And then the other piece is like what fits for them. Like everybody's going to have different resources. You've got a kid here that grows up in Coral Gables, like parents could probably fly him out for things. You've got somebody who's a different part of town, it might be different, right? And so I think that's a big piece for me, like what are the resources that you can and consistently apply to people, and then what works for some people is not going to work for others, and that's unfortunate sometimes, but you've got to figure out what works and how to do that. So I think um to me, big piece is missing in a outpatient environment, a consistent strength and conditioning programming that goes beyond just the clinic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just targeted at their deficit, it's targeted towards athletic qualities that they need for sport. And then the other piece to me is skill development from the sports standpoint too. So for basketball, it's basketball coaches, staff, um, if they're playing on a high school team or that, getting in touch with what that looks like for them on return, because you can't navigate the sport return just from telling the kid to go tell his coach, right, what the plan is. It really helps if you, and I know this is on sometimes very idealistic when you have 30 minutes and you're not going to call every kid's coach and talk to them, right? But like
Yeah.
in the situations you can, how do you do that? And how do you navigate that? I think, and I'm by no means can I outside looking in be like, yeah, call everybody and try to figure that out. But you've got to figure out what works and how to help them navigate that process, because it isn't as simple as, hey, you can do non-contact now. But yes, what does non-contact mean? What can I be in? How to build those drills? And I think understanding the sport helps a ton, but then understanding who they're going over to work with also helps too. um, and I think those are, to me, what makes the difference is really who are the people that are involved in help building that trajectory towards sport.
Mhm.
And I think that's where it it will maybe condense the time before they becoming a player that they want to be again too, as opposed to just getting to do the sport again. Like they can do what they wanted to be able to do when they were previously playing, right?
Correct. Yeah, because obviously how they were before got them to you, so you want them to be better than before.
Yeah, that too, right?
So, what would you think is the most common mistake clinicians make? Because obviously, like you and I both, found one another because we love the space between rehab and then getting back to play. What do you think is one of the most common mistakes people try to, or maybe make when they're trying to add performance into a rehab setting?
Yeah, I think that everything has to be sport specific, right? And everything
Mhm.
has to be sporty.
Yes.
I think if you look in any, and maybe this is a bad example, if you look in a good college weight room, they're not just doing the sport, right? They're doing
Mhm.
things that help with training qualities for the sport. And I
Mhm.
think you have to remember that. And I think in our attempt to really help in sometimes the limitations of what we have resource wise available to build them back to sport, a lot of times we try to recreate sport in the clinic, and it to me it's not the worthwhile use of time. You just can't do it. um you may be, and this is not saying that neurocognitive type training is a bad idea. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying, like, there's a big
Mhm.
gap between what you can do with blaze pods and what you can do in by playing your game, right? And so I think
Mhm.
if we try to lean into that, we can build that ramp alone. That's a big, for me, a big miss. Where I think, or trying to make everything be too sporty. You're trying to train certain constructs, you're trying to train certain qualities. As
Mhm.
those get better and improve, then they're ready to take on the next piece and they're ready for the next step. Um, they're earning the next piece of the progression, as opposed to trying to make, yeah, the worst example of that is somebody trying to back squat on a Bosu, right? But like
Oh, God.
I mean even like trying to do like ball handling stuff in a clinic that just doesn't suit that, right? Like there's things that just don't work, but they can do that at home, or they can go on the court and do it in an environment that's like, and you're using the time while they still have a 30%, 40% quad deficit, and we're doing that stuff. I think that's stuff that it's not the one thing that's going to make a difference yet.
I like it. Now, final question, Tommy. Final question. So you said that you completed a residency. Did you do that at the University of Miami, or where did you complete yours?
I did a residency and fellowship at Duke University, so
Oh, very nice.
up in Durham. Yep.
Oh boy, so you're a Blue Devil.
I'm in the ACC, so I can't be a Blue Devil now.
Not
But
now.
I do. We're still in the ACC, so I can't be a Blue Devil. I'm a Hurricane. But I will say that I did enjoy my time up there. It was fantastic. I learned from a lot of great people, and I yeah got a lot of good people up there still. So, but it'd be like saying our coach is a Blue Devil because he came from there too, but he wouldn't say so either. So,
He's a Hurricane through and through.
yeah.
But, so my question to you then, in regard to residency, what would be 2 to 3 positives and 2 to 3 negatives for clinicians who are just graduating or are looking into starting a residency, what would be 3 positives and 3 negatives from
Yeah,
your
I think
experience?
first off, I'll maybe frame it first. You've got to find the right program that fits what you need. And there's a
Mhm.
lot of different programs, and they all have different exposures. They have different setups. They have different. Um, they're really some of them are designed for different level of people at the different entry points coming into it. I would say that if I were trying to step into University of Miami residency, I it would been challenging for me because I didn't have a team sport background at the time, and so I think ours they get thrown right into the fire with football and um, which is a fantastic experience. But for me, I would have not have known what to do yet, and so for me, I picked a residency that gave me um, more of a environment where I got a little bit more hands on with the acute management of injury, which is something I was really interested in too. And so I worked more high school outreach base with Duke's residency program, and that for me was a huge gap in my learning that I'm very happy that I did manage it, and I think it's made my interactions and my role more supportive for our athletic training staff, where I
Mhm.
think I would have been uh, walking in a little bit overconfident and blind if I had come in just like as a PT. And I think I still am. No, by no means am I an athletic trainer because I did a sports residency, but I think I have much more appreciation for the rest of our staff by doing that. I'm not saying you don't get that from ours, but either I think you definitely do. But I think for me and my where I was coming from, that was really valuable for me. And I got to be the one to run out on the field with the athletic trainer and see how they do stuff and help. And to me, that was important. So I think depending on where you're coming from, you got to find the right program. Then the three positives for me were I got structured learning for sports
Mhm.
PT that really I think was fantastic and valuable from just injury. What injuries am I going to see? How do I manage them? You don't learn all that stuff in PT school unless you have a really special PT school. I'd love to hear about it. And then I think secondly, mentorship is great. And so if you find an environment where they really will invest in you and mentor you, I think that's really, really important. You need it in your career, regardless if you go to residency or not early on. I think it's
Mhm.
important. If you do, I think it just structures it a little bit more, and you're not gambling on if someone is the same way if you're just going into a job.
Mhm.
Um, and there's organizations that do a great job with it, organizations that don't do a good job with it outside of residency, and probably residencies that do a great job with it and don't as well. So I think that needs to be a really clear part of the process. And then third, I think uh, you just get exposed to the setting earlier, and I think that helps too. And obviously that's what you're trying to get into, but I think it really helps if you're wanting to be in a team setting to start seeing that earlier,
Mhm.
because for some people you're gonna go, yeah, I definitely don't want to do that. I don't want to work 80 hours or every. I'd rather be in a private based clinic that does this, and I think it
Mhm.
helps you get a taste of things before you fully went down the route of trying to get a job in it, one, and then two, you're like it's still an avenue where you can divert your course and figure out what you want to do, right? And
Mhm.
I think there's like, yes, this is perfect. I want to do sports performance type of outpatient rehab setting or work in a private specialty clinic like that. I want
Mhm.
to work in a general sports clinic, or I think the team environment's a good step for me. I want to go that direction. So I think it's nice, especially with ones that offer you multiple kind of type exposures in them, to see what a good route is. Sorry, this is long-winded, but negatives, I
Oh, I
think
love this,
negatives
Tommy.
for
This is
me
great.
are you do take a cost hit, and PT school is not cheap, and so a lot of times you're making a little bit less. I think if this is the route you want to go and you're like, I definitely want to work in sports, and especially if you want to work at
Mhm.
a higher level, it accelerates the process for you most likely. And so I think it's worth it. For me, it was, in terms of taking me a little bit of a pay cut to get that next step. Um,
Mhm.
Two, I think it is sometimes a sacrifice depending on what your responsibilities are and all that too. So for me, I have a wife and no kids at the time, so that made it a little easier. But I think that
Mhm.
plays a role into it too. What stage of life are you coming into it at? Where are you ready? Depending on what program it is, they're very time demanding, and so um, I think you're playing with that. And then thirdly, I think um, you could potentially get a lot of this stuff through experience, right? It just may take time. And so I think there's a reason why um, there's a reason why you have to wait a certain amount of time to become a board specialist. And I think
Hmm.
when you become a resident and you get it in the first year after PT school, you need to remember that you're still 1 year out and that you have a lot to learn. And I think
Hmm.
I'm still telling myself that all the time now too. I've been out for 7 years or whatever. Now it's still the same. It's like
Hmm.
you still have a lot to learn. So I think that's another thing. I think it's a great pathway, and I would do it again 100 times. But I think there's definitely things you need to weigh, and it works for some people, and it's the right thing, and other people, there's other avenues to still get to what their goals are.
I love it, Tommy. That was beautifully said. That is a wealth of information. So don't ever worry about giving too much information because it's gold. It's good.
Okay, good.
Then I actually lied. One more question because you sparked one in my brain.
Yeah.
So with people who have completed a residency, what would be three pieces of advice as to how they can leverage the fact that they're a residency trained clinician in order to enter the sports world? Because it or can be very competitive to get some of these jobs. So what would be three pieces of advice for people with that status?
Yeah, no, I remember at the time when I was applying for residencies, I think there were less than 60 sports residencies. I still don't think there's that many now, but so just getting into a sports residency, very impressive one. So that's a good first step. But then after that, I think when you're looking at jobs, this is the one place where they don't just continually add sports teams, like they open up more clinics, right? So I think you have a finite number of opportunities, and I think that is just the nature of the beast of sports, and it definitely proposes a challenge for people that want to enter the space. I think
Mm-hmm.
depending on your sport that you're interested in, there's different pathways, right? If you want to become an NFL PT, it is very hard to do so without being an athletic trainer. And so just having
Mm-hmm.
that awareness when you're going in the process is something you have to know. Um, if you want to get into basketball and the NBA, you're probably gonna oftentimes there are hires that are either direct from residency or even new grads direct to the NBA sometimes because they're building their process and they're taking on mentoring you basically from the start. That's one pathway. Other pathway is through the G League and trying to work your way that way. For baseball, I think baseball is not the easiest to get into from a higher level, but there's so many organizational uh,
Mm-hmm.
outlets to do so with minor league teams, and so I think that's one where you see a bunch of easy initial first steps to access. So whether that's a sport that you want to get into or not, there's a little bit more opportunities there. Big pieces in terms of my advice for navigating the process is sports is really about who you know a lot of times because it is
Mm-hmm.
such a small community, and so get to know people. I think that's a big piece at conferences, wherever you're going, just build connections, and whether it's your area or elsewhere. And it doesn't mean DMing people and just saying, hey, I'd love to learn from you, can you call and talk with me, because that doesn't work. I've done that before in the past, and I think there's much to be learned about that. Jess Ellis has a post on that, so just go look at that. I don't need to rephrase it. He has a really good one that's kind of like the process of acquiring and managing that men's relationship is very recent. So as with rehab code, that's my best advice for that is all summed up in that post. I think when you're building mentor type relationships or you're trying to build those connections to make the next step, it's just really important that you respect that you don't have a lot to offer a lot of times, so that's challenging, but whatever you do have to offer or whatever you can think to add to offer to the relationship, I think just builds it, right? And so and then don't pressure cook it. It won't. It's something that you can't pressure cook a mentorship relationship. You can't just artificially make that connection. It's just like anything else. It's a professional version of dating. Like you're like you have to give a little, they have to give a little back, right? Like it's like what is it? Is that Will Smith, you go 90, I'll go 10, right? From Hitcher, right? So like
Yeah.
you've gotta go 90 and then they might come 10, right? So
I
I
like it.
think you've got to be willing to put a lot into it without a lot in return at first, and that means being patient. So you might go to a conference, you might meet this person, and you might say, hey, I really appreciate, we'll let you, introduce yourself. That's nothing wrong with that. Like, get to know them. Then don't reach out to them. Let it be. See them again, right? Like, let it build
Yeah.
like a natural relationship. You don't just, message and message and message the person you're wanting to date, right? And take them out to dinner, blah, blah, blah. You got to like build that over time. And it's the same way when you meet anybody else. You have to like build that relationship. And at the time, you have nothing of value to offer. You're a student. There's not something and people are really generous with their time. That's not what I'm saying. People will do it anyways, right? Because we love
Mhm.
people that are in the profession and wanting to reach the next level. Um, but then maybe you invite them to speak to your PT class. You have all these different things that brings something for them to do, right? They get to share their knowledge to just more than you, to more people. And so I think people love doing that. Something I know and I definitely hold is that people love talking about themselves. And so if you can get somebody to get the opportunity to talk about themselves, they're probably going to do it.
Yeah.
And so, that matters more so than just like, how can you help me? Right. How can I
Mhm.
help you? Right. And you may not have a lot of opportunities to do so, but I think that's important. The other piece is, be willing to step into a job you might not have foresaw. When I was in my application process, I thought I wanted to work in soccer. Like, I was dead set. So I was like, this is what I'm doing. I was applying to Major League Soccer jobs. I was interviewing. I was making it to the final round. I was like, this is the pathway I'm going. And then I didn't get the jobs. And it was like, for me, it was like, okay, like maybe I'll go work soccer again one day. Like, that's totally, it was like, I just felt like it was a good fit, right? For what I knew at the
Mhm.
time and where I wanted to go. And then, out of the blue, this job popped open on an AASPT job board. And I was like, well, that sounds cool, you know? And so, sent in an application, and I was like, yeah, it was like, I was set on professional sports, right? And then the college job pops up and I'm like, all right, let me apply. Let me see. I'm enjoying working basketball right now. It's Coach K's last year. So it was like absolutely crazy and really cool experience. Um,
Be some good basketball. Oh my
Good
goodness.
basketball, yes. I've been around some really good coaches, and I think it's hopefully rubbed off a little bit. But the the sometimes it's just opportunities. They just pop up, right? And so, like, for you, that, like, I got to spend a ton of time with them, and they were very generous letting me spend a little bit of extra time with basketball. And then this popped up, and it just kind of, things flow. And so don't fight it. I think the best, sorry, I'm rambling again. The best thing I think you can do is do your best to prepare. And when you can't, if you haven't prepared and you haven't bought the ticket for the train, when the opportunity comes, you can't get on it. And so I think, for me, try to lay the groundwork as much as you can, build the connections with the people that you do. Oop,
Mhm.
camera went off. Build the connections with the people that you have. But then, when you're ready, when that opportunity comes, don't miss it. Just try to jump on.
Oh, I love it. That's a great one to end on, Tommy. I like it. Oh. So, guys, thank you so much for joining us today. And Tommy, thank you again for giving us some of your time and sharing us a lot of your expertise. Hopefully, we'll have you back again, because maybe we'll have to do a very large return to sport talk with with Terrence and the other guys.
Yeah, that would be great. I would love that. That would be fun.
People, we will see you all in the next episode. Have a good one.